It started with the business. That's where everything broke. Not our marriage, not at first. My husband Daniel built his company from a single desk in our garage. I watched him pour himself into every decision, every risk. I helped when I could. Accounts, logistics, sometimes just food and silence when he worked until morning. For a while, we were partners, not just in name, in belief, in dream, in fight. Then came Aaron, the investor, the friend. He dressed like a man who never sweated, always in dark suits with that unsettling stillness in his voice. Like nothing ever surprised him, because he'd already decided how it would end. Daniel said he was our answer. Our bridge to the next level, he called him. I remember the first dinner we all had. Me, Daniel, Aaron. I remember how Aaron watched me when Daniel spoke. Not with hunger, not with charm, just interest. Deep, quiet interest. Like he was listening for something I hadn't said yet. 6 months later, Daniel was out of the company he built. It happened in silence. Papers, clauses, technicalities. One day he was the founder. The next, just a man in a driveway, holding a cardboard box and trying not to cry. I wanted to be angry, but Daniel didn't want my rage. He wanted my belief. And I gave it. I held his hand. I told him it would pass. But something in me had already cracked. Not loyalty. Just certainty. Because the man who'd taken everything from my husband was now the only one offering me stability. Aaron didn't ask me out. He didn't flirt. He offered me a position, advisor for his next venture. It was packaged in professionalism, wrapped in necessity. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I had to. Daniel didn't question it. He was too busy trying to rebuild what had been taken. Too tired to see the distance growing between us. But Aaron saw it. He always saw what others missed. I remember the first time I walked into his office alone. The glass walls, the cold air, the view of the city, all screaming power. I sat across from him. Professional, focused. He didn't smile. He just looked at me like he was reading ahead in a story I hadn't written yet. "You don't belong in the wreckage," he said. I didn't ask what he meant, because part of me agreed. That night, I came home to Daniel. He was asleep on the couch, his laptop glowing with some failed pitch. I covered him with a blanket. I kissed his forehead. And I hated myself for the thought I had as I walked to bed. I wondered what Aaron was doing right then. And I hated how easy it was to imagine. Nothing happened. Not yet. But something had already begun. Not between me and Aaron. Inside me. A shift. A betrayal not of body, but of alignment. I started dressing different. Subtle things. I checked my phone more often. I laughed at Aaron's dry jokes in meetings and then told myself it was just manners. I started working late. Then late became longer. Then longer became normal. Daniel didn't ask. He trusted me. And that made it worse. Because trust, when you're not worthy of it, doesn't feel like love. It feels like weight. It suffocates you in your own lies. I still hadn't crossed any lines. But I knew I was circling one. And Aaron never pushed. He never touched. He just waited. And I started leaning. It was a Thursday when everything finally shifted. Aaron called it a working dinner. The term itself was surgical, precise, cold enough to excuse intention. Daniel was out of town, pitching something that wouldn't land. I was in a quiet war with my reflection in the mirror. Too formal? Too casual? Why did I care? I chose the black blouse. The one I hadn't worn in years. I told myself it was for confidence. But confidence in front of who? The restaurant was one of those places without prices on the menu. He already had a table, already ordered wine, already knew what I liked. I laughed too quickly. He noticed. He always noticed. We talked about projections, markets, trends, but somewhere between the second glass and the dessert I didn't touch, the tone changed. "You're the only reason he ever held it together," Aaron said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a test. I felt my hands tremble under the table, not from fear, from recognition. He saw me, not as Daniel's wife, not as a casualty of business, but as a woman who hadn't felt powerful in years. That night, he walked me to my car. There was no kiss, no contact. But I lingered. And in that silence, I betrayed everything I thought I was. The next week, he offered me a promotion. Real, tangible, with title, salary, and an office on the top floor. I accepted. Daniel smiled when I told him. He said he was proud of me, said I deserved it, and I wanted to scream. Because he had no idea who I was becoming, and it wasn't someone he'd ever be proud of. The weeks blurred. Aaron and I grew closer, but not in ways the world could punish. We never touched. We never crossed that line. But our glances lasted too long. Our meetings drifted off topic. Our emails became hours apart and paragraphs too personal. He made me feel intelligent, important, dangerous. Not because of what he said, but because of what he held back. It was power. And I was starving for it. At home, Daniel grew quieter, not suspicious, just smaller. He brought me coffee, asked how work was going, told me he was thinking of applying for a job, lower pay but steady. I nodded. I told him that sounded smart. And I hated myself for how detached my voice sounded. One night, Aaron invited me to a private event. Not romantic, not formal, just exclusive. The kind of place where everyone had secrets and no one asked questions. I said yes. We didn't leave together. We didn't speak about anything intimate. But when he brushed past me to take a call and his hand grazed my back, I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I didn't tell Daniel. Instead, I went home and stood in the shower for 40 minutes, waiting for the guilt to feel like enough punishment. It didn't. Because it wasn't guilt I felt. It was anticipation. The night it finally happened, I had no excuse left to give. No meetings, no deadlines, no pretense of purpose. Aaron called it a late strategy session. I knew what it was. He knew I wouldn't say no. The apartment wasn't his home. It was a rental. Cold, minimal, expensive in a way that didn't try to impress. Like everything in his life, it was efficient, controlled. He poured me a drink. I didn't touch it. Instead, I stood by the window looking down at the city. Everything below felt quiet, small, as if the world had already agreed to ignore what I was about to do. We talked about Daniel, about the company, about failure and ambition and the stories we tell ourselves to survive disappointment. Then he looked at me. Not like a boss, not like a man waiting, but like someone who had already claimed what he wanted and was giving me the dignity of thinking I had a choice. He didn't ask. He didn't move. And still, I closed the space between us, not with passion, not with impulse, with certainty. Cold, controlled. When it was over, I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant or broken. I felt still. As if something inside me had shifted so far, it no longer remembered the shape of remorse. He asked if I wanted to stay. I said no. On the drive home, the city looked different. Sharper, less forgiving. Daniel was asleep again. I watched him breathe. He stirred and smiled at me in his sleep. And I felt nothing. No fear, no pain, just silence. The next morning, I made breakfast. We talked about errands, groceries, deadlines. I didn't confess. And he didn't ask. Because the truth is, he never knew what was stolen, only that something was missing. And I would never give it back. Aaron never brought it up again. It didn't become a romance. It didn't become a habit. It was a transaction, one I made with full awareness. He took my husband's company, and then he took me. Not with force, but with timing. And I let him. Because sometimes the worst betrayals are not born from desire, but from the quiet collapse of belief. And once it breaks, it doesn't return. It just waits for someone to step inside the empty space you used to call love.